Welcome to my talk. I'm really happy to be here in Kyiv for the 4th time in a row. So I'm Maciek Próchniak. I came today from Warsaw, so I'm a bit underslept. And I work in a small, or not so small, software house called TouK in Warsaw. And I'm dealing mostly with integration, stream processing, mostly integration, but I also like functional programming and coding in Scala. OK, so I hope you enjoyed the conference. The lunch was great. The talks are even better. But I have not so good message for you. They want to get rid of you. Who? You know, all these guys in the suits and ties who think, why the hell do we pay these programmers in that sweatshirts that just drink coffee such vast amounts of money? We know the business. We can do anything. We should define it. And many vendors tell them, yeah, you can do it, you can do it. Of course, we know that this isn't true, and no business guy would be ever able to craft this beautiful Scala code, right? Isn't it? We're needed. But think about two samples. One is this. This is Scratch. Do you know Scratch? If you have children in the age of like 8 to 10, then probably you know. This is basically just kind of block scheme programming made in Flash by some MIT students. But it's surprisingly expressive, and people even make games in that. And my son can really do interesting dialogues of sprites with Scratch. So if children can do it, maybe business people also. If you think that they are kind of more serious, then think about this. This is Excel. I think there are quite a few companies where most complex business logic they possess are put into Excel sheets, which is then put in some crazy SharePoint folder and connected to MS Access database. In my company, we have a lot of pretty complex Google Docs spreadsheets, and it's like even sourcing, almost. You have the write side and read side, and it's pretty complex. And I think that in Excel you can encode all the business logic you can think of. So maybe the business people can do it because they know Excel. Well, I think we're still needed, and my talk is to assure us that, we're needed, and when and why we are needed more than, in which places we're needed more and which less. Okay, one disclaimer, in this talk I'll be talking only about kind of business people, analysts changing business rules, not about having them build custom UIs. Although this is quite an interesting subject, I think, I'm not a front-end guy. Okay? And the other disclaimer is that I work in a software house. So this is us, and this is usually our client, right? This is kind of big enterprise. They have their own IT department that don't code, but they are kind of semi-technical. At least they know SQL, and they have business. And in our case, this is the kind of bigger barrier to overcome. So if we can make these guys change business rules or write kind of flows or code, then it's a big win for us because there's no this chasm. If you have technological company, probably this is your bigger problem, right? Okay, so first we'll talk a little bit about kind of my experiences, anecdotes about simple stuff like configuration, DSLs. Then we move to more complex stuff like Drools, BPMN, that's the holy grail of business processes, and then about my current project. Okay, so first configuration. This is I think, of course, this is the most simple way of changing business rules, right? But it also can get out of control. I remember having a system that was quite simple, and its goal was to send kind of notifications, that's what's called notifier, to the customers of one of the largest Polish telcos. So there's a vast configuration, what send, when send, with delays or whatever, in database. Pretty simple, generic solution. But then I overlooked this email conversation. Like, my colleague wrote, don't make changes to configuration, production, or tests until we review and tested them. And then from the client, they said, but you made the system so configurable so that we can make changes without you, right? That was the purpose. So why do you want to review before we deploy to production? And the reason was, well, there were performance reasons and the ability to break the whole system by changing configuration in database. So for me, the lesson is that even with simple means, like configurations, we can develop stuff that is too complex for business people or analysts to change, right? This is something that we have to remember. Another more kind of optimistic sample comes from another client. This time we moved to logistic industry. We've built kind of integration platform for large logistic company in Poland, and logistic companies integrate with retailers, suppliers, customer warehouses, or whatever. Each of them have their own clunky IT systems, and they integrate usually by files. So we didn't want to do it, and so what we did was learn them Camel DSL. That was the nice way of handling integration, and the guys in the logistic company, they learned it. It was okay. They could do kind of basic transformations, but it turned out that they needed something more. They needed to develop more complex transformations of the data. And then we discovered that they already used some ancient tool called Altova Mapforce to document the transformations or the integrations they were using. And it turned out that it's possible to generate some clunky and not performing Java code out of it. So we decided to plug it into our platform. That was not a big deal, and they started to learn to use it. And this is what they achieved, right? They could change all the business rules, and I'm sure you can spot a bug. You can, right? I couldn't. Okay, so they used it quite extensively. And what also helped them was that our integration platform was based on Apache Karaf and SGI. That's the stuff I was talking here, not here, there, but on JEEConf 2 years ago. So they were able to generate some code, write some Camel DSLs, put into some hot deploy folder, and voila. It kind of more or less worked. You know, they were not so big company. They didn't use any of these Kubernetes, Amazon stuff. They just had a server and a folder. And it worked for them, right? So for me, again, kind of a lesson from the project was that the best thing you can do is to learn what your customer is currently using, and if it's possible, use the stuff so that they don't have to learn something new, because then it's more easy to get a buy-in, right? And also that it's very important to make deployment of the stuff easy, so that they don't have to use your usual deployment pipeline. Okay, so that is the logistic stuff. Now we, of course, go back to the telco, which is our, well, main industry that we're serving at TouK. And this time, I'm going to talk about a system for detecting, dealing, and processing with alarms from various elements of network infrastructure for telco operator. Because you see there are lots of base transmitter stations, transmitters, and so on, and each of them generates some events, alarms, traps, especially when, for example, there's a thunderstorm and something crashes, right? And the system should not only collect them, but as much as possible pre-process it with some custom rules. And the rules change pretty often, right? From time to time, new devices appear. From time to time, some planned works may appear, and some elements of network infrastructure would just be out of order, right? Or sometimes we know that something is broken, and for 2 weeks it will be broken because nobody will fix it, and we just want to ignore events from certain place. So when we prepare that system, we notice that there are quite a few different types of users that had different needs, right? The first one were kind of normal users. They just had a span of one event. They wanted to add some simple actions like if event comes from this device, then just ignore it, or add comments automatically, or something like that, right? And they were pretty simple guys. They didn't know how to code, how to even use SQL. So for them, it turned out that simple solutions like this widget from jQuery is enough to to prepare some expressions that they will be able to use. I think we didn't use eventually this one, but something similar. And for them, it was enough. There were also some more advanced users who wanted to track correlations between different events or detect some time patterns between them, which is quite abundant in this field. And for them, we prepared a solution based on Drools, right? We'll talk about it just a little bit later. And for real power users, well, for them, the only thing that matters is Groovy, right? Fortunately, they were technical enough, and with some DSLs and some problems because they didn't know how to use IDE and so on, or how to deploy, but they landed. And they can more or less add new types of events or write custom scripts, right? So it turns out that even on the business side, well, kind of business, because it's network support system, even the business people are more or less technical, it's possible for them to do something with some pretty simple DSLs. So for me, the lesson from this project was that it's important to know your users. Who are they? What do they need? And what are the differences between them? Because to achieve the same thing, sometimes you need totally different measures, right? So that was kind of handicraft solutions. Let's move to some kind of, well, let's say more enterprisey stuff. That is Drools. How many of you use Drools or heard of it? Oh, some of you. Okay, this is a framework from JBoss, and it's kind of in some places it's quite well known with business users because what it is, it's business, right? Rules, management. So the business, of course, like it, and system. Okay, so that just install it and we write the rules. This is what they hear, but more often than usual, this is what they get. Right? It's not so nice anyway. Yeah, I have to admit, I wrote this, so let's forget it for a moment. But anyhow, for the last 6 or 8 years of my work at TouK, we've been through quite a few use cases of using Drools in telco companies. Some have worked, some, as this one, not so much. But generally speaking, it's the eventual outcome is quite positive. And why is it so? Well, because Drools has, what are the use cases first? One of the most common is something similar to something called next best action, right? So we have a client who goes to point of sale, or we have a client coming to the internet shop of the telco operator, and we want to show them the best offer that he would want to buy, right? So there are a lot of rules. For these guys, we don't want to sell iPhones for those ones. We don't want to sell Windows phones or whatever, based on their current arguments, current properties, tariff, do they pay or they not? And these rules change, well, maybe not daily, but every week, maybe. They could change because the marketing department has still new ideas, right? Another is generating events from kind of contact history, where again there are quite a few rules. What event should be safe for showing to consultants and what not. Okay, and the Drools model, how do we define it? Is essentially is quite nice and concise. Okay, so we have a name, we have kind of when section where we defined what are the prerequisites, and some kind of DSL, or first, of course, we define model, and some kind of DSL. It's not so difficult to comprehend. And then we have action. Actually, it's kind of arbitrary piece of Java code, but in our case, we can assume it's kind of well-defined set of actions, right? Like propose this offer or that offer, or don't propose hyphen, and so on. And we have a set of rules, like a few hundred. Okay? And what is especially nice in this context is the mode of work of the Drools, because we can treat it as kind of pure function, functional stuff. We just put the data, we have some function base generated from rules, and we get an output, right? It's easy to reason about, easy to test, even better for Drools, sometimes the rules can be encoded in Excel. This is the real big win if you can encode the rules in Excel. Of course, there are some hidden cells here which contain some DSL, but businesses don't have to deal with that. They can just add new rows, how to handle the next cases. And this is really cool because Excel, again, is something that they know how to use, they know how to use, right? For some time, there are even, I think, efforts to make it a standard similar to BPMN. I think it's called decision model and notation. It's kind of work in progress, but few vendors are actively, I think, participating so that it's not Drool specific, but kind of a standard. So Drools are pretty nice, but there are a few quirks that can lead you to, well, essentially nowhere. And the worst things happen when you forget that Drools should be stateless, pure function, right? And you try to load some more data inside of your rules or change the behavior of the model while evaluating TouK and so on. Because then it's no longer so easy to reason about, and what's even worse, the performance usually degrades quite fast. And when I say it's not so easy to reason about, I know what I mean, because some of our clients tend to treat the rules as just kind of, I don't know, sets of ifs, right, that are executed just as they think they should be executed. Unfortunately, this is not the case, because underneath, the rules use quite complex execution models based on some red FREG algorithms coming from, I think, from 70s, but still very quite complicated. And it's not just a bunch of ifs, right? So the rules can easily get out of control, and these are my colleagues debugging the code that I've shown you before. Yeah, this is what may happen. So for me, the lesson learned is that rules are okay, but we have to strive to keep all those rules simple, use XLS when we can, and be aware of leaky abstractions. Because if the more abstractions of Drools will leak, or some different statefulness of the model will go inside the rules execution runtime, then yeah, we have performance degradation and various even worse things. Okay? But the rules were pretty okay, actually. And now we'll move to BPMN. How many of you have used BPMN stuff or tools? Good for you. Good for you, yeah. Because BPMN is a holy grail of many vendors who sell the vision to the business that they will define all their business processes and this nice flows, right? Drag and drop, connect the lines. There are some, of course, technical details inside, but you don't have to worry. And you know what? BPMN is executable specification, so you can take a diagram. This easily to grasp XML will be generated, and then with one click of a button, you will deploy it to process engine. Everything will work, right? This is the vision that many vendors sell. But fortunately, even honest vendors tend to admit that, okay, you need developers for that. Don't think that business will be able to develop the whole process. In our case, it was even a little bit worse. Our case was, again, we're in telco industry, was MNP process. This is mobile number portability. That is when your mobile is in one network and you want to move the number to another. Right? This is underneath it's quite complex business process which involves not only you as a customer, but also the other operators who want to know who this number belongs to, and most of the business support systems underneath, right? So it can be quite long process, like, I don't know, 1 month, something like that, even in edge cases, of course, usually 1 day. And it involves a lot of orchestrations with different systems underneath, right? So I've been involved in developing this stuff for many years, of course, with many breaks. So we first started with predecessor of BPMN, And that was a nightmare. And then we moved to try to develop our process in these BPMN tools. But now we're slowly rewriting this whole stuff to plain Scala or Java, right? Okay, so you may say that, yeah, we failed, but why? Are we incompetent or what? Probably a little bit, but there are also more fundamental problems. And these fundamental problems with this process is that it's, in fact, nobody from the users ever wanted to change it by themselves, from the business users, from the analysts, and so on. And why? Well, one of the reasons was that it changed pretty rarely, usually forced by some legal stuff. And when it changed, the change involved also integration code, which were, of course, handled by us and not by the business people. So it was not just a matter of moving some blocks and adding or removing some arrows, but you had to change the integration stuff. And the other problem with it, with this whole process, was that it was quite critical. And if something broke, it meant real problems. So, because if you think about it, when such process or code is developed by people like us, by some software company, the pipeline is more or less like this. First we develop, then we test on some testing environment, then we have some user acceptance tests, and only afterwards we deploy on production. If we remove developers and just leave some, I don't know, IT department of enterprise, then, okay, maybe they'll test some testing environment, maybe user acceptance tests, and so on. But if we let, for example, I don't know, any kind of business people, analytics, change stuff, then we're left only with this, if we are lucky, of course, and if they will deploy to user acceptance tests. So there are quite fewer places where bugs can be detected, right? And this is a problem for these kinds of critical processes. And yeah, this is the conversation I had with one of our clients. So he said, Maciek, yeah, I know we would be able to code this stuff up to do it in this or that solution. But then our manager will come and say, okay, you did that, but who will maintain it? Who will be responsible? Who will be for on-pager duty? So that's why we pay you to do it. Not because we can't code, but we want somebody to maintain and support it. And stateful processes, like BPM, most of BPM stuff, are quite complex in that regard, especially when they have some timers, exception handling, compensation transactions. Because if something breaks on some step of the process, for example, because you introduced a bug, then you can discover it only, I don't know, 2 or 3 days later, and then you have, I don't know, 2,000 or 3,000 cases to fix manually in the database. Yeah. I've been there enough times to know that it's hard to do. Another problems with such BPMN processes is versioning. It's also hard, and it's also, I think it probably shouldn't be tackled by the business, because you have to, each time when process changes, you have to answer questions like, what happens with the processes that are already happening, right? For example, from a week ago. Should we migrate them to different version? Will they work? Who knows? And if we want for them to stay how they were in the previous version, then how do we know that integration stuff that we just deployed will work or not? So this is quite difficult, and I'm not surprised that management wants, competent people like us to run it. And now when I think about such processes, I tend to think about this kind of a diagram, that when you have a process that doesn't change too often and it's critical, then you better leave it for developers to handle. If you have a process that changes quite often and isn't that critical, it won't blow up your company, yeah, you can think about using some stuff that allows business to change rules. And if you have critical and fast-changing process, then probably you're kind of a startup, and then you're out of scope of my talk, right? Because then business and developers are in the same company. Okay, but you may also think, okay, so yeah, it was better for developers to develop the solution, but why didn't you just use these BPMN tools like Activity or whatever? They're quite cool. And yeah, we could, and we did. But some cultural differences arise. Because, we are developers. We want to use Git, our favorite IDE, and not necessarily Eclipse. We want to have unit tests. We want to have abstractions, extract functions easily, and so on and so forth, right? And these tools are more focused on visualization, web designers. The best you can get usually is some clunky Eclipse plugin, but sometimes works and sometimes not, right? So there's some kind of gap. And that's why we could do it in Activity or any designers. We decided that, yeah, we would rather code it the way we want. So this is the problem. But still, yeah, I think that, I don't know, maybe in some cases BPMN can work. There are some nice vendors like Camunda. If you are into that stuff, you should definitely check them. They are honest vendor. And there are different areas like workflows with not so many orchestration and integration and more like human tasks, passing documents around. I think that, although I'm not an expert in that field, that people tend to have more success in using that for. Okay? But for me, I think the most important lesson learned from my BPMN experience was that more often than not, it's not the coding that's the problem with deciding who should do the change, the business, the analyst, the IT department, or the we should. It's running a production, it's maintaining SLAs and so on. That is the real problem that you have to solve, right? And if you have integration on the process or the process is stateful, it's even worse. So you should think carefully beforehand, how do you want to handle those? Okay, so that was probably not so optimistic observation. So now we move to something what I'm kind of a little bit more proud of. That is TouK ESPP. That's my current project. Well, it kind of doesn't have proper name so far, so let's call it ESPP. That's what we call it. And again, we're in telco, in our enterprise, but this time we're dealing with stream processing. What streams do we process? Well, these are streams of billing data, like each time you make a phone call, send SMS, you are billed. About click streams from various web pages of telco, and signal data. This is a large stream of all interactions of your phone with mobile network, for example, to detect where you are near which transmitter stations. And what do we use it for? Well, essentially, we use it for sending stupid spam SMSs, like buy this data packet, come to us, you'll get offer for iPhone, and so on and so forth. But fortunately, we also use it for a little bit, I would say, more noble goal. That is fraud detection. This is also quite important, so that you don't pay $5,000 per month for some Kiribati phone calls, right? So most of the processes that we developed in those fields are kind of pretty simple. First, we take a large stream of data, then we filter out to recognize events that are interesting. For example, hey, here's the client who is kind of near our point of sales. Let's invite him for a coffee, right? Stupid, but sometimes works. Then we enrich it with some information from customer profile to know if he pays or not, what tariff does he have, and we do another part of filtering or aggregation. For example, how many phone calls did he make to Value in last 4 hours? If like 10, then probably there's some kind of fraud involved, right? And to do this, we use Apache Flink. That is really advanced stream processing engine, quite similar to the Kafka streams, or maybe not so similar that you can hear on the next talk. And I talked about Flink last year here on JEEConf. Anyway, the processes in Flink are defined using this nice, concise, readable Scala DSL, right? It is concise. It is readable, right? Please, it is. For us it is, at least for me. But for our client, it was not really so. So he told us, OK, I'm happy that the processes work. They work fast. They work OK. But I want to be able to change the filters, to change the conditions. So he said, OK, we'll make you a configuration. You can change the thresholds of various events. But I want to configure a bit more. OK, so you will be able to write some Scala expressions somewhere, and then we'll compile it on the fly, put it into some process templates, and you'll be OK. Is it enough for you? More or less so, but you know, these files, these Scala expressions. So at this point, we gave up and said, OK, we'll build here a graphical user interface. And he said, yeah, OK. And then we told him, OK, and we'll do it for half price so that we can, in the future, open source it. And he said, yeah, go ahead. So we did that. And our main assumptions when we built that was, first, the expressions should be accessible for kind of semi-technical people, like people who know how to use simple SQL, because it was meant to be used by some kind of analytics, who use data warehouses and so on, to make it easier to test process and facilitate kind of experimentation so that they are not afraid to use it. And also we had an assumption that we don't want them to be able to do anything. That we had an assumption that we are still needed. We'll still have to write some code at some places. And this is what we arrived at. This is a nice slide. I'm kind of a little bit proud of that, so I'll leave it for 2 seconds. OK, enough. So this is how this process looks like currently. And OK, sometimes, of course, it can get a little bit out of control. So the business has, in fact, it's a diagram copy from Microsoft Visio, right? So we didn't invent it. It's really. OK, so you may ask, OK, so what are these blocks? What can do with that? And mostly you can write some filters for events with some expressions. Yeah, these are the expressions that at least some of the users from our client side can understand, can modify. You may ask, what kind of expressions are those? And I'll tell you that this is well-known Spring expression language. If you use Spring and its configuration facilities, you know that you can write some expressions in annotations. And we just use it. And surprise, surprise, it turned out that it's expressive and readable enough for most of the users. Even more surprising, it was performant enough with some tweaks. And I think we invoked those Spring expressions like 300,000 times per second in peak. I was quite surprised that it can handle. And also, these expressions are simple enough for us to be able to do some basic code completion, right? We have some model defined, and we can do autocomplete for the users, which is very, very good for them because they don't have to know exact model, right? So this is for expression part, not for testing. And in this business case, we're in better place than formerly with this orchestration part, because we have stream of data that flows through Kafka. And we can replicate the stream and put one copy to production and another to kind of pre-production or test. So this is far better use case when you can replicate that, because here the users can make some experiments and see what happens. Another good thing is that this system, in fact, it's not so critical. It's only spam messages, right? If we send a little bit more, OK, clients will ignore it. Also, with fraud, it's not that bad. And we also have a few mechanisms that prevent us from flooding clients with SMSs. So it's rather safe to experiment, safe to even deploy in production. Unfortunately, with many clients, this leads to this attitude. OK, and this is, again, something we probably want to prevent, right? Because sometimes people tend to think, OK, we'll deploy it in production. We'll see if it works. If it works, then we'll tell you to test it properly on tests, all right? So we want to convince them to test a little bit better. And again, because we have a stream which can replicate, we can look inside, it's quite easy because we can tell, okay, take like 10 or 100 or 1,000 record, more or less random records from that stream, dump it to file. The user can inspect the events, make some adjustments, and make a test of a process in some kind of a sandbox. And then you can see what happens. This is, again, this is something that makes them a little bit more confident that the process works okay. And when they are kind of confident and they deploy the thing, then one of the few examples of kind of, I don't know how to say it, wow effect on my customers was when we used Grafana for displaying metrics of their business events. Usually when I thought about Grafana, I was only thinking, for those of you who don't know, Grafana is open source tool for visualization of metrics. It can work with Graphite or other time series databases. Yeah, and usually it's mentioned, in, I think, in case of kind of technical metrics. But in our case, we use it to display how many SMSs we are sending, why we are sending them, and why not. And this really gives an effect for the business people that they think they have control. Of course, they don't have full control because, as I said, we decided that they can only do rather simple things on those diagrams, right? And for more complex stuff, they have to come to us, make a change request. We will develop some custom block. They will configure it. And then we'll put it in a jar and deploy separately, right? Because inside, we'll handicraft Scala code, not for them to use. I think this is quite important when we deal with such systems because usually when you strive to achieve completeness, that you can do anything on this diagram, like, for example, I don't know, loops or recursions, then the complexity and difficulty tends to rise exponentially. So I think that you should try to leave stuff somewhere here, that the business user can achieve, I don't know, 80% of functionality, but still it's quite easy to get. And the rest should be handled by professional developers, right, like you. Okay, so this is where we are now. And then I hope that in a month or two we'll open source that. So if this made you feel kind of interested, then be sure to check our Twitter or GitHub. Okay? But as this gentleman, we have a lot of things to do, so it can take some time. Okay, so it's faster than I expected. Anyway, time to recap shortly. So when you think about system that will enable business users to change the rules or to generate new processes, these are the points I think you should consider. So first is to know your client, who he is, what is his level or her level of competence, how technical they are. Are they able to handle just Excel sheets or SQL or maybe Groovy or something like that? And take into account the change of the process. Is it even worth trying to make them change stuff? Because if it's like one every half year, then probably it's not worth it. Another thing is beware of leaky abstractions, because when you have state problems or performance, then even the most beautiful user interface or DSL or whatever can ruin the stuff. And the most important thing is that you should remember, why do they pay you? Not because they cannot specify it, they cannot code it. They pay you to maintain it, to take responsibility for that, to be on pager duty. So if you want to try to make business people change some parts of the system, you better choose the ones that are not so dangerous to change, so that they don't blow the whole company. Right? And the last thing is that we should decide where to stop. Some of the processes are better hand-coded by us. And we should make it explicit so that we can use Pareto principle, right? That 80% are easy, and 20% is better left to us. Okay? That was all I had to say. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed, and hope you'll enjoy the conference. And, yeah, see you around. Yeah.
What is your experience in terms of complexity of the GUI tools, right? If you are drawing this kind of schema, and these things are usually really impressive when they are simple, but when they get complex, I mean,
Yeah.
do you think there is a point at which it actually becomes more difficult than Scala in a sense?
This is what I meant when I was telling you that we tend to use more abstraction and, to extract function. We extract function, we abstract things to make it easier. And I think that those business people, analysts, are more, they tend more to do copy-paste. So things can easily get out of the control. And if you think about it, and you look at the diagram, you say, OK, if we would extract these points somewhere, so for us it's important that we have some kind of sub-processes, then everything will be easier. But your customers probably would just copy, copy, copy. One of the most, welcomed features was to have a button to duplicate nodes. So yeah, but I think there is such a point that it's not so difficult to reach. But on the other hand, the logistic guys that I've told you in the beginning, they reached some enormous level of complexity, and they could handle it somehow. I mean, for me, it was far above any level of complexity that I could handle, but they could. So, and people, when I see how much stuff people can put into, handicraft Excel sheets, then I don't know. For me, this level is quite low, right? So quite quickly, I think, okay, this kind of functionality would be better moved out to some custom block, and you'll just configure it. But for them, it's okay to copy. So I don't know. I think it's bad attitude on their side, but so far I cannot fight it.